Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me down. Before I get into the topic that I was sort of listed to speak about, I want to pick up on a few of the things that we talked about this morning. And I was just digging around on my laptop to see what remnants of the last 10 years I've got around. So I dug out our 1999 submission to the Australian Broadcasting Authority public inquiry into content of online services. And my favourite quote, and indeed anyone who's looked at my Facebook page will see that this quote from John Perry Barlow remains my favourite quote, but it's still as appropriate today as it's ever been. I warned the ABA, and I've subsequently warned multiple governments, that if they keep carrying on, we will end up with government by the clueless over a place they've never been, using means they don't possess. And that just really nicely, to me, encapsulates where we are and what we see people trying to do. And that's what really makes it so difficult to come to grips with, as David was saying earlier. It's hard to grapple with what we're doing when they don't know what they're doing. They think they know what they're doing. They're trying to use means they don't possess to do it. And you're trying to operate in this space and help them. It makes it really difficult. The next sentence of our submission there is also really interesting. And for those who haven't read the actual legislative schedule that went with the Office of Film and Literature Classification, and it's still there for the current classification board in the legislation, the very first sentence of the schedule, which has all of the classification material there, the classification criteria, starts out by saying adult Australians should be able to read, hear and see whatever they wish. It doesn't say totally unimpeded, I grant. But that starting point should be articulated, because then you realise what you're doing is excising those areas which, for good public policy reasons, we agree should be, child pornography and abuse and various other bits and pieces. But I mean, that starting point is important, because fundamentally, if the solution you're trying to bring in undermines that basic philosophy, then you realise the policy must be wrong and you've got to take a different line. So that was one interesting bit. The other bit that I was reminded of was, this was the Hansard of, so that was 1999, the first one. This is a few years later when the New South Wales Parliament was trying to bring in this lunatic legislation, which was basically the criminalisation of the federal scheme. And a key part of it was that you would go to jail if the material you put online was likely to be classified as objectionable if it were ever classified. So not only was it bad enough that you would go to jail if you disclosed material that had been classified as objectionable, this you had to correctly anticipate. So you can imagine the chilling effect, as the term the Americans use. Basically everyone would be scared of putting anything up in case someone subjectively might classify it wrongly. But even more so, back in those days, when I say back in those, I mean, this one's only about 7 years ago. This is a 2002 inquiry. Dr. Arthur Chesterfield Evans, who was the, I think a Democrat member of the New South Wales Upper House, he was still talking about this whole thing should be opt-in. You should be able to opt in to the internet because it was too dangerous a place. And you can see from my answer to him, it's just still at this very basic level of explaining how the internet works and what a hyperlink is and stuff, he was still thinking you turn on your PC and all pornography will arrive in front of you, and it's shocking. I mean, it's just so ludicrous, and these people are governing us. It really is government by the bloody clueless. And just as we get into it, this is what you've got to deal with. The chairman says, sorry, we kept Mr. Argy till 11 o'clock. They say, well, I can go longer. Because you guys need more education. No, we've got another witness, from the Christian Democrats or something, to tell us how good this stuff is. So then, ultimately fortunately though, we were able to put this out as a result of the evidence we gave. There was actually a majority of people on that committee who were brave enough to come out and say this is all lunatic, it can't work. And so we put out a press release welcoming that they'd repealed the legislation. So that was the other point. They'd actually implemented the legislation but hadn't proclaimed it. So they're having the inquiry between its enactment and its proclamation and commencement. But, you know, we got to the point where they actually had to repeal the legislation because it was so stupid. So that was all terrific. Then what was the next step? Then we thought we were okay for a while. Then we had ALP 2007 election policy. And whilst Scott didn't think it had been documented anywhere, this is straight out of the written material out of Kevin Rudd's policy speech, which I know you all still have, you know, front and centre. But this is what he actually said. The ALP policy is to provide a clean feed internet service for home schools, public computers. ISPs are to filter out content identified as prohibited by ACMA for this clean feed. The ACMA blacklist will be made more comprehensive to ensure, look at that word, ensure, children are protected from harmful and inappropriate material. Now that totally enraged me, I've got to tell you. That is so gross to represent to the Australian public that that's an outcome that's possible to achieve, and yet that is what is driving this. That is front and centre what underlies where we are today. Peter adverted to it, but potentially hadn't found the particular document. But basically, Stephen Conroy, if you get him quietly by himself in a quiet corner, will say, I was given this is the poison chalice I was handed, and what choice do I have? I've got to go and make the best, you know, fist of it I can. You'll see if you compare his statements, you know, even in recent days, he's ameliorated that kind of promise very significantly, you know, and it's all been very nicely massaged. But if you want to go back to what was promised, it was just an absurd promise at the beginning. It's driven the policy debate. It's forced them into what David correctly called policy-based evidence. They don't want to have anybody challenge this underlying premise because, you know, a Prime Minister with 66% popularity rating can never be wrong, and he promised the world this, and he's damn well going to get it. We just got to figure out how. And the importance of that is that it dictates the approach you have to take. And so, for example, if we come to the report that the Australian Computer Society put out a few months ago, we've been heavily criticised for establishing a task force that was going to advise on the technical issues, have a bit of a look at the policy and provide an expert commentary. And people have said, well, your underlying premise was disgraceful. You've worked on the premise that we're going to get this policy. We said, look, we've got a choice. We can go out there and bash our head against the brick wall, as we have been for the last 10 years, and up until now we have been successful. But now it's pretty clear they're going to do something. It's a bit like saying we're not having an ETS. I mean, you know, we thought up until last weekend that the Liberal Party had even accepted the inevitable. We're going to have an ETS, let's try and make it a half-decent one. So we've said, all right, well, if you're going to have some sort of filtering, what can be done? And what we've said is there's no silver bullet. What we're trying to do is work out what's a multifaceted approach to use government, industry, end-user initiatives to educate users with appropriate technical security, educational awareness. Trying to adopt an approach that achieves the sort of policy objectives in a way that might work instead of in a way that doesn't work.